You destroyed everything. Now it's my turn. I thought I had it all. 20 years of marriage, a beautiful home, a daughter who was excelling in school, and a husband who was well respected at the university. Richard was an esteemed professor, always calm, collected, and kind. He'd been my rock for so long. We'd built our life from scratch, moved across states to follow his career, raised our child together, and found comfort in our routine. It wasn't always thrilling, but it was steady, predictable. But lately, I'd started to notice something small at first, that gnawed at the edges of our seemingly perfect life. Richard, my steady, dependable husband, had changed. He wasn't the same man I married. He was distant, withdrawn, and for the first time in years, he'd stopped coming to bed at night. I told myself it was just a phase, a rough patch, perhaps. He was busy with work, wasn't he? He was preparing for lectures, finishing research projects, dealing with administrative duties. Professors have a lot on their plate, don't they? But then I saw the signs. The subtle ones at first, but then they became glaringly obvious. He started staying late at the office more often, always citing some university committee meeting or grading that couldn't be done at home. Yet, when I would ask him how his day had gone, his answers became vague, rushed. No more details about his students, no more talk about the exciting new papers he was reading. I could tell he was shutting me out, withdrawing from me in ways I didn't know how to fight against. It wasn't just that he was working more. It was the little things, the way he would suddenly be glued to his phone, screen turned away from me, his thumb furiously texting under the table when we'd have dinner. And there was the smell of his cologne, new cologne, one he'd never worn before. The scent would linger in the air when he'd come home late. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to admit it. I refused to believe that the man I'd loved for so long could betray me. Then came the new clothes. Richard had always been a practical man, the kind who wore worn-in jeans and simple sweaters. But one day, he came home in a sharp designer suit. Not just any suit, one that had cost more than my monthly shopping budget. He'd never shown interest in fashion. And when I asked him where the suit had come from, he brushed me off, saying it was a gift from the university for a lecture he was giving. I didn't buy it. But still, I told myself to keep calm. Maybe he was going through a midlife crisis. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me to be patient, that men go through these things. But the whispers in my mind wouldn't go away. I knew that something was brewing beneath the surface. The turning point came one evening when Richard left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Normally, he would keep it locked away, password protected. It was his work computer, after all, but there it was, unlocked, just sitting there. I hesitated, but only for a moment. The temptation was too great. I knew it wasn't right, but my gut was screaming at me. I opened the laptop, praying I was wrong. I wish I could say I was prepared for what I found, but I wasn't. The emails were the first thing I saw, and not just casual notes. These were messages dripping with affection, with flirtation, with promises of things I hadn't heard in years. His words to her name was Lisa, a student of his, young, eager, and impossibly pretty, were the exact same words he'd once whispered to me. My heart sank as I scrolled through the messages, my hands shaking with disbelief, and then I saw the photos. The photos were worse than the words. They weren't just casual selfies or innocent snapshots. They were intimate, erotic. There was no denying what was happening. Richard had not just been emotionally unfaithful, he had physically betrayed me in the most cruel and humiliating way. It felt like the floor had been ripped from under me. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? How could he do this to me? To our daughter? To everything we had worked for? But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I knew if I did, I'd give him the chance to lie his way out of it, to manipulate the truth as he always had. No, I would wait. I would watch him squirm, watch him think that he was fooling me, while I collected the evidence to destroy him. I started compiling everything. I took screenshots of the messages, saved every email, every photo. I wasn't just going to expose his affair, I was going to make sure it destroyed him. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. He had ruined everything, and now I was going to take it all back. Then the opportunity came. Richard told me he had to attend a conference out of town. Another one of those important events he couldn't miss. He was acting strangely agitated, as though he couldn't wait to get away. But I was no fool. I knew he wasn't going to a conference. So I followed him. I waited until he was halfway down the street. Then I got in my car and tailed him. It wasn't difficult to keep up. I knew he wouldn't suspect me. He drove with purpose, not realizing I was right behind him. He didn't go to any conference. He went to a hotel, a boutique hotel that was miles away from the conference center. And there she was, waiting for him outside. Lisa. They embraced, their kiss lingering far too long for my comfort. My stomach turned in knots, but I didn't confront them. Not yet. I didn't want a scene. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking I was angry. Instead, I took photos, clear, damning photos that would prove everything. I could have ended things there. Confronted him, thrown the photos in his face, and left. But I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure he paid. I wanted him to lose everything. The following weeks were a blur. I installed cameras in the house, discreet ones, hidden so that Richard would never notice. And sure enough, it didn't take long for him to invite her over. The footage caught it all, the way they laughed together, the way they touched each other, how she sat in our living room as though she belonged there. And then the worst part, footage of them in our bed. The betrayal was complete. Now I was ready. I meticulously organized everything, emails, photos, texts, videos, and I sent it all to the university's ethics board. I didn't just accuse him of an affair. No, I made it clear how he had used university resources for their trysts, how he'd lied to his colleagues, and how he had been using his position of power to exploit a vulnerable young student. I left nothing out. The response from the university was swift. Within days, Richard was suspended indefinitely. His colleagues turned against him, and whispers followed him through the halls of the school. His reputation, the one he had built over decades, was in tatters, and yet he still didn't know that I was behind it all. When he came home that evening, looking disheveled and pale, I knew the end was near. "Something's wrong at the university," he said, his voice trembling. "They're accusing me of misconduct." I feigned surprise. "Accusing you? Of what?" I asked, pouring him a drink as though I were his wife, still the supportive partner. It's about Lisa," he whispered, his eyes avoiding mine. "They're saying I had an inappropriate relationship with a student." I almost smiled. Who would say such a thing? I asked, my voice laced with false concern. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The guilt in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. That night, while he tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, I sat in the dark watching him. And when he finally did sleep, I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. I didn't need to say anything. The papers said it all. The next morning, he saw them. His face crumbled. His eyes pleaded with me to reconsider, but it was too late. "It's over, Richard," I said calmly. "I know about you and Lisa. I know everything." He tried to explain, to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. He had made his choice. I had made mine. The divorce was swift. I walked away with everything: the house, the bank accounts, and custody of our daughter. Richard's life fell apart. The university fired him. His colleagues turned on him. Lisa, too, was expelled. But as I sat in the silence of our now empty home, I felt no triumph. The revenge was hollow. It hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't healed the hurt, the betrayal, or the years I had wasted on a man who never truly valued me. I had destroyed his life, but in doing so, I had destroyed a piece of myself too. I had won, but at what cost?